Former inmates sentenced in the 80s to 2000s, what changes in the modern world shocked you the most? Story 1. My friend's older brother was jailed in 1994 and served for 15 years. He said that when he entered, having a car phone meant you were super rich, and then to see everyone with a cordless, pocket-sized phone after his release was mind-blowing. He also mentioned that TV ads all had websites to visit or promoted completely online stores, a concept entirely alien to him since he hadn't really seen or used the internet. Also, he found the chip and PIN process of paying with a bank card extremely exciting. Unfortunately, I lost touch with a friend after an incident involving a haddock and an umbrella, so I can't provide further updates about his brother. The last I heard was around 2012. He seemed to be doing okay, having a job and a place to live. Now, about the haddock and umbrella story, when Danny and I were teens, we used to play stupid pranks on each other, from glitter down the back to tipping yogurt into a coat hood on a rainy day. Typical, teenage stuff. Over time, these pranks got more and more intense. I played a good one with a bag of flour. It was hilarious, especially when he kept finding flour in his ears and nose for about a week after. Now, in revenge, Danny got a hold of a haddock and decided to hide it at my house. Up until then, our parents hadn't been too involved, but this prank changed that. The stench from the fish hidden under the shoe rack was awful. My family and I searched and found it easily, got rid of it, and aired the house out thoroughly. My parents were pretty annoyed. They thought the pranks had gone too far as the house reeked of fish. For a few days after, we aired the house constantly, but the fish smell lingered. We couldn't figure out why until after enduring 4 days of this horrendous stench, we discovered a second haddock hidden in a closed-up umbrella. This one had gone bad and ruined the umbrella. Danny had hidden two, one in an obvious spot and one in a tricky place, so when we found the first, we'd stop looking. My parents went ballistic and the house smelled awful for about 2 weeks afterward. I got grounded for 2 weeks and unfortunately took my frustrations out on Danny, blaming him for crossing a line. I overreacted and that incident put an end to our friendship. Shame, really. He had a clever idea and I wish I'd appreciated it then. Haven't seen him since I left high school. Dude, imagine just being locked up for that long and finally being free again. You really feel like you've just stepped into the future. Story 2. Anthony Ray Hinton described people walking around looking down at the things in their hands, which were phones, and amazingly not bumping into each other while doing so. Here's what happened, as far as I could remember. Oprah Winfrey. On the day you were released, your best friend, Lester, who had visited you every single week for nearly 30 years, picked you up. You'd been behind bars since 1985, so you get in his car, and what was the first thing you wanted to do? Ray Hinton. Lester thought I'd want to go get something decent to eat, but I wanted to go where they had laid my mother's body. I see him messing with the radio dial, then we start driving down the road. I heard this little white lady say, "In 1/10 of a mile, turn right." I jumped and said, "What the hell?" Oprah Winfrey. You thought there was a white lady in the car? Ray Hinton. Yes, and Lester's laughing so hard he has to pull over. He says, "That's a GPS." When he explained what it does, it really hit me how long I'd been locked up. The world had changed. Story 3. My buddy returned home just 2 weeks ago. I did my best to prepare him for the cell phone craze that's everywhere. I told him to brace himself for seeing people glued to their phones 24/7, whether in stores, cars, on sidewalks, or even just chilling at home in front of the TV. Seriously, it's constant. I also gave him a heads up about how much technology has changed since he was last out more than 13 years ago. Back then, phones were still flips, far from these interactive touchscreen marvels we have now with easy internet access. The second day back, he called me and he was pretty angry. It was funny. He hated feeling stupid, almost like being a child again. He struggled to make a simple call, let alone get the hang of video chats or FaceTime. At one point, he could figure out why our call ended up playing on the car radio when his friend turned it on. Total confusion. He also wasn't thrilled about his kids teaching him either. It made him feel down. He kept dwelling on feeling quote-unquote stupid. I tried telling him that we all faced a learning curve with the current technology and that people seem to forget how confusing it was when we first encountered smartphones. We take for granted that learning process. Today, he seems a bit more patient with himself, the daily battle, but I'm there, reminding him that we all struggled at the start. I try to keep a positive vibe and be there for him, even if it's just to lend an ear when he needs to vent. Story 4. Back in my first job, I had this colleague who'd been through a long stretch in prison, probably on parole at the time. His past choices were pretty rough, dealing with things he shouldn't have, and there were rumors about him making threats to his ex-wife. This all happened around 2012, and surprisingly, we all had regular conversations. Whenever the store's radio played music, it was like a time capsule. He'd sing only 90s tunes. I assume he just favored that era's music, but little did I know those were the last songs he'd heard before his prison term. The modern world was like a foreign land to him. Google? Nope, never heard of it. YouTube might as well have been alien to him too. Facebook, Twitter, he was clueless. Browsing the internet, he barely managed. It was interesting meeting someone a fair bit older, perhaps late 30s, early 40s, who was so disconnected from these tech wonders. Every time Hootie and the Blowfish or Blues Traveler played, his image popped into my head, belting out the lyrics. But what struck me most was his optimistic outlook. He was determined to turn his life around, and I sincerely hope he did. I often ponder what became of him. He had this knack for injecting humor into any situation. Sharp wit. I truly hope he found his way and is doing well somewhere. And who knows, maybe he's discovered by now that YouTube is a goldmine for cat videos. Well, I bet he'd be happy to find out that he can now binge watch movies on Netflix instead of renting them at Blockbuster. Are you feeling for this guy? Wait until you hear Story 7. Wait around for it. You'll surely scratch your head at what the woman said there. Story 5. I'll never forget this, and I tell this story often. I remember being in 8th grade when the U-Scan machines first hit Kroger. They were the first to introduce it in Louisville, Kentucky. Anyway, I'd grab some milk and some other items, and there was this guy in line with a few things just staring at people using the U-Scans. Finally, after watching so many people use it and it was my turn, he approached me. He said, "Sorry, my man, I don't mean to bother you, but I just served 20 years in prison and I have no idea what I'm looking at." I let him go ahead of me and walked him through it. He was extremely grateful for something that hadn't crossed my mind for even a second. It was that moment I realized how badly America's prison systems were failing its citizens. They're expected to be tossed back into society without new marketable skills. No social integration, no clue on the applications of new technology, all while not ending up back in jail. It's just so dumb. Story 6. No matter the year you step out, that first touch of carpet can throw you off completely. My uncle spent 20 years in prison, and his first words at his mom's house were, "Whoa, I haven't felt carpet in years. It's so soft." Then he spent a good 10 minutes just wandering around barefoot, squishing the carpet with his feet. And darkness, too. Being in total darkness again really rattled him for a while. Things we take for granted, like complete silence, showering without sandals, sofas or chairs with cushy padding, and a bed that fits your whole body, those were some of the strangest yet most incredible things he experienced again. I also heard another guy talking about the same experience. He was locked up in the 70s and got out around 2015. At first, he thought everyone was walking around chatting to themselves. It turns out they were on the phone with those wireless earbuds. Then he offered his seat to a much younger woman on the subway, but she wouldn't take it, even after he insisted. Eventually she did, but it bothered him that women wouldn't accept a seat despite his age and gray hair at that point. Story 7. I remember getting on the bus years ago, and this old bloke got on heading away from the town center towards the more residential areas. Without a second thought, he sparked up a cigar. One of the passengers told him, "You can't smoke on a bus." He apologized and quickly stubbed it out. But he also said he just got discharged from prison that day, and when he went in, you could smoke anywhere you wanted, so this was a massive culture shock to him. Story 8. I received a call from a woman looking to claim some abandoned funds. I gathered all her info and then requested an email address. She goes, "What's email? I've been in prison for a very long time. I've heard about it, but never used it." Honestly, I'm shocked there aren't mandatory classes in prison to keep people updated on what's happening in the world and with technology. It'd be a big help for ex-cons to adjust to society once they're out, right? Isn't that what the prison system should be aiming for anyway? Story 9. My cousin's husband, who got hitched while doing a 10-year stretch starting around 2008, had this big idea right after getting out. Hit up Hollywood Video, grab some flicks, and watch them with her. Then she hits him with Netflix, kind of close to the Netflix and chill thing he was thinking, but man, he couldn't believe video stores were gone. Streaming movies without leaving the crib was a total shocker for him after being away for so long. Story 10. So I've got this rule. I don't usually fork out money to beggars in Dallas, Texas. It's the same old tale spun by the same folks time and again. However, there was this one guy who just got out of the slammer, seemed like a straight shooter. No tear-jerking stories, just a dude wanting to unwind. This was around 2013. He comes up and goes, and I quote, "Man, I just got out of prison. I've been locked up since 97, and everyone with their cameras on phones, it's like a whole new world. Anyway, this guy says I can light up this fat doobie if I cough up $2. Can you spare me some change?" His honesty struck me, and his way of talking was spot on. That's the only time I've willingly dug into my pockets for a stranger. So this guy here just met the homeless version of Flava Flav. He definitely got a from that experience. Hey guys, if you sympathize with these people trying to make sense of the world right after they get out of prison for so long, then please do show your support by giving this video a like and subscribing to my channel today, like right now, because it really helps me out. Thanks for watching this far, and let's go ahead and get to the next story. Story 11. I once knew this guy who was completely blown away by digital cameras. He spent money on this ancient, dreadful one and couldn't stop going on about how amazing it was despite it being a very old model. Another interesting story was from a conversation I had with a lady in charge of education at a federal prison in Florida. She shared that whenever the discussions veer off course or the atmosphere gets too lively, she brings up a new feature of the latest iPhone, and like magic, everyone's attention snaps back to her. Story 12. I once hired a guy who had just been released after 17 years, around 2005. About a week into the job, he goes and buys himself a phone. He was like a kid in a candy store with that push-to-talk and texting feature. But a week later, he's all ticked off because he couldn't text his order to Hungry Howie's. But he still ordered anyway, and here's how it went down. Customer, 2 medium pepperoni pizzas and 16 wings. Thanks. Pizza place. Thanks for your order. We offer our pizzas in small, 12 inches, and large, 15 inches sizes. Do you mean our spicy pepper delight deal or just regular pepperoni? Also, could you share your delivery address with us? Customer, and a Coke. Story 13. I worked alongside this guy a few years ago who had spent a solid 10 years in prison. He came out just when Bluetooth headsets for phones were all the rage. It was like a whole new world for him. He'd crack jokes about the random conversations he thought people were having with him, mistaking those with headsets for talking to him. Smartphones were a complete mystery to him and gave him the creeps. Then, a friend shared this story about his dad's friend. This guy had been locked up for around 30 years, something about a second-degree charge. So when he finally tried out virtual reality, it didn't go so well. He got so freaked out that he stumbled, took a tumble, and broke the VR headset. It was like he had stepped into another universe after being away for so long. Story 14. We had this older guy move into a room in our house a few years ago. Normally, we rented to students, but word got to us that he needed a temporary spot until he found a permanent place in our city. Thing is, it got really frustrating because this guy refused to use the internet to search for a car or a new place. He just didn't trust it and had zero clue how it even worked. We tried to show him the ropes, thinking he was just set in his ways, resisting technology. But it turns out he had spent a long 11 and a half years in maximum security prison after being wrongly accused by the Western Australian police of a serious crime back in the mid-90s. Came out with trust issues and a real distaste for this new internet world. Tech is everywhere these days, so that guy might as well learn to use it. Otherwise, he's going to be like those dinosaurs that didn't adapt. Story 15. Back in the early 2000s, I worked with this guy who had been sentenced in the mid-80s and had just been released. He shared how the first time he hit the men's room, he spent ages searching for the flush handle, and those motion sensor toilets, they were like something from outer space to him. This made me remember this documentary about someone sentenced in the 70s, Otis, I believe his name was. He was blown away by what he saw, especially being in New York. All those screens made the city feel completely different. The various colorful drinks and folks wearing earphones as if they were part of some secret service, it's quite an eye-opener to watch. Story 16. The surge of e-commerce completely caught me by surprise. I never imagined it would outdo the ease of a good old-fashioned brick-and-mortar store. Back in 1997, I landed community service for a traffic violation. It was like the world hit the accelerator pedal right after that. Trying to keep pace with this rapid evolution is a real challenge, especially with these hands of mine, always aching and worn out from trying to keep up. Story 17. My buddy just got released, and the world of LEDs totally bowled him over. Everywhere you look, there are these insane LED billboards in stores, and when we hung out at a friend's, he was practically squinting from all the blazing LED lights in the house. Actually, our friend's kitchen is like a beacon with those crazy bright LED bulbs. Seriously, you could spot his kitchen from outer space. But what really blew my buddy's mind was that the H&M LED wall sign he saw was something else, like a whole other level of futuristic lighting. Story 18. Not my own experience, but one of the most surprising transformations I've heard about is from one of my dad's friends. He was talking about how in the past having a larger rear end was seen as embarrassing and all the models used to be on the flatter side. Now, things have totally flipped. Must be Sir Mix-a-Lot's impact, maybe, I believe. Also, there was this guy I worked with who just got out of prison after being sentenced when he was young. He was really amazed by the touchscreen ordering at Wawa. He couldn't wrap his head around why the staff couldn't take an order verbally. Story 19. To me, it's impressive how kids' toys have become so innovative and advanced. I mean, back in my day, I was out there playing in the dirt, running around like a chimpanzee. But looking back, I thought that sometimes the simpler things leave more room for your imagination to become wild. However, too much open space can actually put a damper on creativity. Imagine this: if I asked you to whip up any story versus asking for one about a homing pigeon finding his way back home for the first time, or something like that, the latter might be trickier. That's why I could say I've somehow adapted to change. I'm now a fan of things like Legos or games such as Minecraft or Stardew Valley even. They let you explore your creativity, yet there's enough guidance to keep the ideas flowing without getting stuck. True, kids' toys have come a long way, but we've also had to deal with some pretty weird stuff, like that skibidi toilet. Ugh, that thing was a nightmare. Story 20. I asked a buddy about the toughest part of readjusting to freedom, and here's what he shared. Closing doors. I'd always leave the fridge wide open without fail for months. There, you're not allowed to open or shut anything by yourself. Plus, I'd accidentally let the pets out when I forgot to close the front door, which someone else had opened in front of me. You forget the last one in rule, etc. It's like learning it all over again. Got any favorite things you've rediscovered? I asked. Candy Crush, he exclaimed, whipping out his phone and diving into the game. 5 minutes later, he's all hyped, proudly announcing that he's leveled up. It was so sweet. Story 21. I remember I was assisting this dude who went in around 2005 and got out around 2014. He had this old black and green AudioVox phone among his things and wanted to activate it. I had to break it to him that it wasn't going to happen. About 3 months later, he goes, "You know what? I'm digging the iPhone, but I'm waiting for the latest release." The guy adapted real quick. Story 22. It's crazy how things have changed. Now, back in the day, if you wanted to play video games with a buddy, you had to trek to their place. Now everyone's got cell phones, so you don't even have to cross your fingers and hope that they're home. And computers are everywhere now. I remember being told I'd need cursive for high school papers, but it turned out to be all about typing. I learned cursive in first grade, but by third grade, we were all getting schooled in typing. Middle school came around and it was all about submitting typed papers. Things sure switched up fast. I love how everything is convenient now, but I get why some people miss the old days. It's fun how you had to be in the same room as your friend to play the arcade and other video games. Story 23. What's up with the Legos, right? They used to be straightforward. I mean, come on, you know what I'm getting at. Legos were basic. Something went down out here while I was away. Harry Potter Legos, Star Wars Legos, intricate kits, itty-bitty blocks. I'm not hating on it, I'm just curious. What went down? Also, the fact that grass is legal now shocked me. Story 24. Back in college, I ran into this guy at a bus stop who had just stepped out after doing 20 years behind bars. He was amazed by the whole cell phone concept, how we could talk to anyone using a computer in our pocket. Explaining texting versus calling took some doing, but what really got to him was watching the news. He'd been cut off from TV inside, and now seeing how divided and crazy it had all become left him stunned. Then there was this guy I represented, 12 years behind bars, got out around 2006. His first move? Hit up McDonald's for a wardrobe change. I asked him what he cherished most about being out. His answer was, being my own boss, taking a shower when I want, hitting the sack whenever I feel like it, no permissions needed. Those were the types of freedom he hasn't tasted in years. Story 25. My dad used to share stories like the time he left prison, went to Walmart, and got emotional because he could use the restroom without having to ask. Some of our relatives did extended stints and faced the same situation, needing permission for something as basic as using the bathroom. Story 26. My dad once hired a guy who had recently been released from prison to work with him for a day. He went in during the late 80s and was out in the early 2010s. It was about 2 months after his release, and my dad jokingly said to him, "I bet you were surprised when you heard about Michael Jackson." The guy replied, "Yeah, his death was a real tragedy." My dad clarified, "No, the child controversy." According to my dad, he'd never seen such shock on someone's face when he showed him the articles. Well, I guess jail's not exactly the place to stay updated on celebrity gossip. I don't even follow that stuff myself. If you want more funny stories, then please do make sure to stick around for what is the most idiotic thing a computer illiterate has said. Story 3 was hilarious. I'll see you there, and thank you for watching this one.